All right, we are over here at one of my rain catch barrels. This is the one that I've had for a while now. It's the home of the Venus flytraps. Took the cover off so you could see that growing inside the tank we have lots of green algae. Look at all that algae now. Remember, there's plenty of types of algae, different species of algae. The green algae, why are they green? Because they are carrying out photosynthesis. Okay, so there's lots of algae in here. Notice, I mean, as I use the water, some of the algae gets exposed, but these organisms are living in the water, growing on the side of the tank, but submerged, fully submerged in water. They live their life in water. They reproduce in water. They must be in water in order to do business as algae. And algae are sort of colonial groups of single-celled organisms that can carry out photosynthesis, and they're actually they're the producers for this little ecosystem that I have going on right here. I actually also have some minnows in here. The mosquito larvae will come. The mosquitoes will come in and lay their larvae in here, and the mosquitoes will the minnows will eat the mosquito larvae, and they'll poop, and then I'll use the fish waste in my garden, and got a nice little ecosystem here. But the algae are the producers there. Okay, and so they're the most primitive form of what we would consider a plant on planet Earth today. Okay, all right, let's go have a look at another group. Okay, we are over here on the north facing side of our house. Okay, and what I want to point out about this side of the house is that it almost never, this section of the yard right here is almost never in direct sunlight. If the sun moves over throughout the day, even later in the year, it'll come down this way, but this little pocket of the yard right here is always shaded. It's always a little bit cooler, okay, and it's always a little bit moister. And so because of the moisture content in this area of the yard, it rains, it never really although it fully evaporates, it stays good and moist over here. We got some cool looking plants over here, so let's take a look at this. Okay, now remember, bryophytes, like mosses, all right, here's some mosses right here, the green fuzzy stuff. You see this stuff growing on rocks and on trees and stuff right down near creek banks and things like that. This is sort of similar to the environment around a creek bank. It's almost always really moist. Okay, and you can see these guys aren't very big. They don't get very big because they don't have vascular tissue. Vascular tissue allows plants to move water great distances. That's the xylem. And then to take the products of photosynthesis, the sugars, the glucose that they made in the leaf, and move it to other areas of the plant, like the stems and the roots for growth and all that. Well, bryophytes don't have any of that. So they have to stay real small. The only way they can move things around their different cells is through diffusion and osmosis and simple procedures like that don't require energy. Okay, so these guys are really small. Now, if you can really zoom in and see, you might be able to see the different individual mosses in their different life cycles. Some of them in the haploid stage, some of them in the diploid stage. But you have to really know what you're looking for there. All right, now. The next group on our cladogram, remember, was the ferns. Ferns, the group that includes ferns, was one of the first groups that we have fossil evidence of that evolved vascular tissue. They got bigger. Okay, they don't have to stay low to the ground like the mosses because they can move water and sugars longer distances. And so, in the same moist area of the yard here, we have some ferns. I don't know exactly what species of ferns these are. Okay, but here we've got kind of in this little pocket again that doesn't get much, little if any sunlight, and it stays moist. And we're also right here by our dryer vent where it stays nice and cozy warm when it needs to be. Really conducive for these moist loving plants. And if you look at these, see if I can find one. I found one yesterday. Let me see if I can find one. Here we go. Here's one. So this older leaf, these on this frond of this fern here, you can see these little brown dots. These are little spore packets, little spore apparatus that will open up and release spores. Let them fall, they'll be down in the water. Other plants will drop their spores will get together and hopefully reproduce. So both mosses pretty much reproduce the same way. They're right near and in the on the water, so they reproduce by releasing spores. So these groups of organisms are ones that hadn't yet developed seeds. They reproduce, they get by just fine using spores, but they hadn't yet developed the mechanism for dispersing their seeds far and wide. We got to go look at an example of a gymnosperm to see that. So let's go have a look. All right, we had to walk down the street here to get a really good example of a gymnosperm, but I think most everybody knows what a pine tree looks like. Okay, pine trees are examples of gymnosperms. Gymnosperm means naked seed. In other words, they don't put their seed in a fruit, it's exposed in one of these cones, okay? So the way it works is the seeds are going to be down inside this cone, and when the cone pops open, the seeds are right there. Squirrels and other little rodents and that kind of thing love to get those seeds. There's not too many left in this one. When it opens up like that, that's its mechanism for releasing its seeds. You also probably seen the pine seeds, the little helicopter, and so the wind catches them and disperses them some distance away, okay? Another thing about gymnosperms, often referred to as evergreens, okay, because they don't lose all their leaves at one time like a lot of different types of species do. They'll keep them year round. They have adaptations for living in colder climates and things like that. These guys tend to do quite fine here. One last thing about gymnosperms, most of the time the plants themselves will be either male or female plants. And what you're looking at when you're looking at a pine cone like this is a female cone. So this comes from a female plant, okay? The male cones, I don't see any examples in this yard, but they're much smaller. They're, you know, just little shoots almost. You've probably seen them, and they're what release all the pollen everywhere in the springtime. So these guys have already opened up and dropped most of their seeds. Lots of pine cones on the ground here. I can't really see. Oh, here's one. Let's see. Let me dig this one out here. Here is a pine seed. Oh, it's real fragile. You see, it's the remnants of it anyway. Okay, but the seeds will be in there, and when the cones open up like that, the seeds get dispersed. They get pollinated by wind. All that pollen that gets released by the male trees gets collected by the female trees, and these are mature cones that are releasing all their seeds. All right, let's go have a look at some angiosperms. The last group of plants that we're going to look at are the angiosperms. Angiosperms are the flowering plants, and many times those flowers mature into a fruit. Okay, and so something like 90% of all of the plants on the earth are considered angiosperms. They're in this category of flowering plants. And so when flowering plants evolved, quickly became a very advantageous strategy for reproduction, and so most plants do that now. So here's a couple of examples. Everybody's familiar with roses, okay? Roses, of course, produce a very beautiful colored and oftentimes sweet, beautiful smelling flower. They're highly adapted for their flower, but not so much their fruit. Okay, we've sort of through artificial selection selected these types of plants for the pretty flowers that they make, but they don't necessarily produce a ton of fruit that we would consider valuable. On the other hand, our tomato plants that we have over here, okay, here's one of them that's already starting to produce flowers. Okay. If all goes well, pollination takes place. These flowers will mature into a fruit. We're going to talk about the various plant organs in a little bit more detail later on. Okay? But these are all examples of plants that produce flower. They enclose their seed in a fruit, and that fruit gets dispersed, eaten, something, you know, caught by the wind some kind of way, so that it disperses it widely, disseminating their offspring far and wide. When we talk about all the different types of angiosperms, we can categorize them a number of different ways. There's herbaceous plants. Herbaceous ones like these tomatoes and like these squash are ones that will never develop woody tissue. They won't develop and harden into a tree. So most of our you know, the plants that live 1 or 2 years are going to be, you know, these are going to fall into that category of herbaceous. Things like a little oak tree over here, or, you know, my neighbor's really nice oak tree over here. These, of course, are plants that live year after year, producing woody tissue. We'll maybe get a chance to talk a little bit about that in another lesson later on. Other ways that we can categorize have to do with the longevity of the plant, the life cycle of the plant. Like these squash and these tomatoes, they will grow, reproduce, produce their flowers, hopefully some fruit, and die all in the same year, in 1 year cycle. So we refer to those as annual plants. Some types of plants will take 2 years to do that. Bulbs, things like lilies and onions, things like that, usually will live 2 years before they flower and reproduce. And we call those biennials. And then finally we have things like these big trees here that produce every year. Every time the acorns fall off this oak tree, that's reproducing. Okay? Every time my peach tree is producing peaches, they're reproducing. Trees generally live year after year after year, reproducing each year once they mature. And so we refer to these as, what's the term? It's lost. I slipped my mind. I'll have to come back to it. Perennial. There it is. Perennials, because they live year after year after year. Okay. So lots of different types of angiosperms, flowering plants, categorized a number of different ways. Hopefully we'll be able to get into some of that here in a little bit more detail in some further lessons. Okay. So there you go. That wraps up this edition of Biology at Home. We'll see you next time.